We are now live.
So there's a few people, you're admitting everybody, right, Conrad?
Yep, just did.
Okay.
All right, Kathleen, I think we're live.
Welcome, everybody, to the Senate District 59 Town Hall Forum. We're going to talk about the 2022 legislative session. I'm Kathleen Schuler. I'm Vice Chair with Senate District 59. And Jeff Strand is our chair. Do you want to introduce yourself, Jeff?
Thanks, Kathleen. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the SD59 Legislative Forum. I'm Jeff Strand. I use pronouns he, him. I'm chair of the Senate District 59 and the 5th Congressional District DFL parties. Back to Kathleen.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We are honored that Commissioner Jim Schowalter could join us. Senator Champion will be introducing him in a few minutes. We also want to welcome all of the SD59 Central Committee members and our elected officials, Senator Champion, 59A Representative Fu Lee, and 59B Representative Esther Agbaje. So it's wonderful to see. We've got 77 people signed up. I don't think we're all on yet, but hopefully the rest of the people will join us. We're looking forward to meetings in person at some point down in the future when we get done with this pandemic. So after short presentations by our speakers, we will take questions, including some questions that folks submitted ahead of time, and then other questions in the chat. So please put your questions in the chat anytime during the event, and we'll get to as many as possible. So I'd like to turn it over to Senator Champion to introduce Commissioner Schowalter and our House colleagues.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for all your hard work. And also thank you to Jeff and other members of our wonderful Senate District who work so hard throughout the year and other times to engage the community, because it's all about engagement. And tonight is no exception. There'll be a couple things that will happen tonight. Number one, at the start, we're going to hear from Commissioner Schowalter, and I will introduce him shortly. But then you also will hear from us as legislators to talk about what we're looking to work on, and also hear from you. One of the things I want everyone to know is that Representative Fu Lee and Representative Esther Agbaje, we are a legislative team. So we have divided up the important issues that we'll talk about tonight. And remember, even if one member is not talking about, let's say, public safety, the member who's presenting on public safety is not only speaking for themselves, but for our legislative team. And so we want you to remember that. I probably will repeat that early on. But before you hear from Representative Fu Lee or Representative Esther Agbaje, we're going to hear from Commissioner Schowalter. Commissioner Schowalter was appointed to the Minnesota Management and Budget Office by Governor Walz in September of 2020. Commissioner Schowalter is the Chief Financial Officer. He can talk a little more about that. And he previously served as Commissioner of MMB, is what it's affectionately known as, when he was appointed by Governor Mark Dayton in 2011. So I guess he was doing such a nice job that they decided to bring him on twice. So we are happy about that. So that you all know a little bit, Commissioner Schowalter led the state through efforts to resolve a record $6.2 billion deficit and an unprecedented government shutdown in 2011. Now he will lead and help lead with Governor Walz the state through an unprecedented $7.7 billion surplus if all stands. And he can talk about why I'm qualifying that when he does his presentation. One other thing I think is important to know is that he received his master's degree in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government from Harvard University. And I like to say, because I think it's important to note, that he also received his bachelor's degree with a major in economics from my alma mater, and we share that, from Macalester College. Representative Fuli, don't be jealous of that. But I think Representative Agbaje is happy because you also share something in common with her as well. So without any further ado, please welcome Commissioner Schowalter to discuss the state's fiscal landscape and anything else that he believes is important for this wonderful group to know. Commissioner Schowalter.
Thank you so much, Senator. I just appreciate the introduction and the welcome. I really am thrilled to be here. And I just got to say, what a set of powerhouse legislators between yourself and the representatives. The district is very well represented at the Capitol. We've got a lot on the plate. So this conversation is going to be, I think, useful. And I'll just try to set the stage a little bit, give you a little bit of background to where we're at right now financially, because so much has changed. Really, I've been in this job, as you mentioned in the introduction, about 1.5 years now. Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan called and said, Jim, we need you to come in. Let's do it. And I was like, how big's the deficit again? We basically weren't sure we were going to make it through the year with even after spending all our budget reserves at the time. And here we are 18 months later in a dramatically better place. And so while I think a lot of us have some COVID hangover, some trying to like, what's next? What's the next surprise? The bottom line is we've just come a long way and it's so much better. One element of that, today the governor released his capital budget recommendations, $2.7 billion of new projects, dominated with about 40% of them are for asset preservation. It's taking care of business to make sure that things that are in the public domain continue to be kept up, continue to be useful, and serve our communities across the state. But there's a lot of other great projects and a lot of other great opportunities in there. And so all in all, it's, a lot is happening. A couple of quick things just to make sure everyone understands where we're at. Because really this past year has been a year of surprises. We have gone from a place of worrying about how COVID was going to affect our revenues, knowing full well it was affecting our communities. But we were also not sure if we were going to lose some of our ability to respond to that as a state. And because of our progressive tax system, because of some really good policy and things just working differently than we expected, the state's budget is about in the same place as we would have thought a couple of years ago, with revenues basically being maintained and our ability to respond much stronger than we would have thought a year ago. When we released the budget forecast just a few months ago, we announced that there was going to be about a $7 billion, $7.7 billion bottom line available for this upcoming biennium. That's a big change, and it's a lot of resources. But as the senator said, you never quite know. Every time I think I've got a good idea what's going to happen in the next couple months, it's proven wrong. But the bottom line is we are continuing to see tax collections continue going forward because our progressive tax structure is basically taxing the people who are still making significant money and benefiting from the changes in the economy, and giving us opportunities right now to rethink and look at how are we going to go forward in responding to COVID? How are we going to build jobs and opportunity? How are we going to maintain our healthcare system as we've got challenges across the board? The governor will be announcing a new package of supplemental recommendations in just a little over a week's time. So there are a lot of priorities and a lot of good work that's already going on. And I know I've been working with him and the Lieutenant Governor, and we'll be having that package ready for everyone. Even some pieces of it will be coming available in the next few days. So that's kind of where we're at right now, with trying to fight COVID on the one hand and manage the budget on the other. And I mentioned COVID just because it's been kind of omnipresent. It's been omnipresent in my family's life. Our kids are going to school, and it's like, are they coming back sick? Are we going to be doing remote learning again? How are we going to manage? But at the same time, from a state's perspective on my day job, it's a question of how do we make sure that we're allocating federal help that's come to Minnesota smartly to make sure that we're responding on a quick, constant basis. And I can just tell you, I've never seen anything like it. I've been with the state for more than 20 years, off and on. And I've never seen anything like the efforts that have been going on for the last year or two, where on a daily or every other day basis, we're getting together, gathering information from the field, from our state agencies, from suppliers, from the budget and HR teams to make sure we're responding to problems as quickly as possible and finding solutions. It's been amazing. Tiring as heck, but amazing. And it's just, what you'd expect us to do. And I'm really pleased that the governor and lieutenant governor have gotten us to this place. So, Senator, that's kind of my quick remarks. We've changed circumstances a lot from a year and a half ago, and we're looking at a session with significant resources, some one time, but some ongoing, and I think an opportunity to really take a big swing at making sure that we've got the capital resources available so that all communities benefit, that we can address some of the environmental concerns that we have out there, and we can also take care of a lot of work that hasn't been addressed over time, but needs to be addressed. I just, in closing, I just want to also just point out there's a number of projects that I've gotten to visit, and I visited some in your district, and it's, I think, really important to note that the governor and lieutenant governor are increasing the equity project recommendation. Last round was $30 million. That was the first time it was ever done. But it made a lot of sense because it allowed community groups and populations of color and underrepresented groups across the state to have access to some of the resources that other communities were getting on a routine basis. We've increased that from $30 to $100 million in this set of recommendations. And it's just a great opportunity, I think, for Chair Lee and everyone to move forward with some great opportunities in our community.
So, Commissioner, thank you so much for those opening comments and talking about the landscape. A couple things, because we always try to make sure that we provide as much education to those who are listening and confirm some things that they already know. Can you talk a little about, we know that there was the December forecast. When will we know for certain that those dollars will be, certain? And then also, what impact does federal dollars that we received, or federal funds, impact that $7.7 billion, and whether there are any federal funds in that $7.7 billion projection? Great
question. The state received many billions of dollars from the federal government, those ARP dollars. About $2 billion went to local units of government, about $2.8 billion went to the state, another $3.5 billion went to basically state agencies through federal programs. The numbers that I gave you are really the tax receipts and the revenues of the state. And they don't include the roughly $1.1 billion that we still have from ARP funds to be allocated by this upcoming legislature. So there's still opportunity to allocate that for hero pay and for many other things that are, as the legislature and the governor deem appropriate. It's part of that opportunity. And then can you speak to one of the questions that's in the chat is, how does the amount owed for unemployment benefits or insurance or unemployment to the feds have an impact on the Minnesota budget surplus, if any? It does. It doesn't show up in the numbers that I mentioned. So when I talk about our projected surplus, I'm talking about how much we're expecting to receive and how much we are already authorized or expected to pay based upon the actions of the legislature. And so the UI Trust Fund has a formula that says when in deficit, taxes will go up on employers. A lot of different rules around that, but taxes will go up on employers in order to make sure that that fund continues to have money in it. Over the last couple of years, as you know, as everyone knows, unemployment skyrocketed. We as a state, I think, responded appropriately to make sure people got benefits. But in the doing so, our fund got a huge negative balance. We basically owe the federal government money. So that debt does not show up in these figures. It is, depending on what you're trying to do, it's more than $1.5 billion, all the way up to around $2.7, $2.8 billion that we're going to need to figure out in the coming months, if depending on how we want that tax on employers to go on and how we want to sort of continue financing the program. I think the key thing I want everyone to know is that the UI program did exactly what we would want, which is that this is money that helped people who weren't employed be able to maintain their housing, maintain eating in their household, and avoid more crisis on top of the crisis that we already had. So it's a debt, it's an obligation. The state's gonna pay it back one way or another, and that's a huge choice that the governor's got as part of his budget recommendation.
And two last questions that were sent to us earlier. One is from Brad about property taxes. How might the state be able to provide property tax relief to people in Minneapolis as the city is planning to increase our taxes by a double-digit percentage? And let's see. And so I'm gonna give you the two questions, right? So, and the second one is, considering the budget surplus, do we think it's time to do away with taxing Social Security? And Minnesota is one of the only 12 states that do. Snowbirds declare residency in other states to avoid this tax. So if you can speak to those two things, and then we'll let you go, and we'll thank you again. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Sure thing, Senator. And, my colleague, Commissioner Robert Doty, is exactly the guy who could totally crush these questions, but I'll give it my best. On the first part of local government aid, the state really does a formula approach to helping cities of the first class, as well as other cities across the state, so that we have kind of a uniform way of helping from a state level to a local government, so that we're giving resources to city government, but also allowing autonomy for everyone to sort of manage their work and their affairs as they see best, as it works for that community. So I don't think I necessarily want to go to specific how does the state help Minneapolis, as much as to say local government aid, as well as any number of local aids, is the way that the state helps, along with just our work together. Because we're working together, whether on mass transit and in many other ways, to make sure that Minneapolis, as well as the entire metro area, continues to thrive and grow. So in terms of helping Minneapolis, and that's probably the key issue of local government aid. And as far as taxing on snowbirds, that has come up throughout my career, and it is an issue. And one of the tensions I just want to really call out on the other side is that Minnesota tries to have a progressive tax system in which people will ultimately all participate and help pay for public goods. And as you look at the data, as you get into the analysis, you realize that on demographic basis, some types of income are taxed more than others. And so if you make money and you have Social Security income on top of it, the question is, what's the effective tax rate that somebody should pay, whether they're retired or not? What is that fairness? And so that fairness issue is usually the push and pull about how we treat income for retirees versus anybody else. But it's a consideration, and I know it has been an issue that's come up in the past, and I'm sure it'll be coming up again.
Absolutely. And again, those are some of the issues that we're going to weigh and put on the table and really fight to bring to everyone's attention, so that there's attention to this important information. So thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for being with us tonight. Senate District 59 really appreciates all the information that you have provided to us. Thank you so very much.
Thanks so much, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner.
One of the things that I think is important, and I know some people got on earlier, and I talked about this, that you're going to hear from Representative Fouli and also from Representative Esther Agbaje. And we have divided up the things that we're going to talk about tonight, and still leave room for individuals to ask us questions, but also present ideas if they have some. And we thank again Kathleen and Jeff for all the hard work. So I am going to start with Representative Fouli. Representative Fooley is there. He is going to talk tonight about bonding, education, and the environment. Those are the three topics that he's going to cover for us tonight. And remember, his comments don't only just represent him, but it represents our legislative team because we work together. So Chair Fooley, go forward.
Thank you, Senator Champion. And before I start with the issues, thank you to Chair Strand and Kathleen for organizing this with Conrad. And so I'll just give some high level update about what we are expecting to tackle on education, environment, and then capital investment, which is the area that I chair over at the Minnesota House. So around education, just wanted to flag that, we'll continue to deal with and try to address some of the struggles that school have gone through or are continuing to experience with regards to the pandemic, from resources around mental health for the students and staff, to the academic needs of students from pre-K to grade 12. And in addition to that, we really need to think about, why do we have a budget surplus? And, kind of tying back to before, we have seen that we do have a budget surplus because of the decrease in revenue that's being spent on education. I believe in Minnesota, this decrease was shown in the November forecast to be around 326 million. And so we are spending 326 million less in education because of a decline in enrollment. And we are seeing this because, families and students are shifting to other school options. And also we are seeing this because of a decline in birth rates in the state of Minnesota. And then continuing on, some other important issue for us to tackle on over at the Capitol is to address the special education and English language learner cross subsidies. This is where the federal government has not held up to their end of the bargain in funding special education and ELL. And so there's a funding gap there. And so the state of Minnesota could potentially fill in that gap with the budget surplus. That's a discussion that we'll continue to have over at the Capitol. And then just switching issue now to the environment, we have seen that, with regards to what happened over at the federal level, there were a lot of investment coming into the state of Minnesota, especially around clean and drinking water infrastructure. Right now, the state of Minnesota is about to receive just a little bit over 116 million. And this will require the state of Minnesota to have some matching funds in order to be able to tap into this resource. And that's an important issue that our committee, the Capital Investment Committee and the Environment Committee, will be taking on together. And then important for our community members, continue to push for environmental justice, issues like the cumulative impact issues that I've been working with some of our residents on the north side that Senator Champion has been carrying in the Senate. How do we ensure that, our public health, agencies out there, our state agencies that are tasked with public health, like the Pollution Control Agency and whatnot, they are actually protecting the interests of, residents, our neighbors here in North Minneapolis. And so we'll continue to push for that. We made history, even though, we didn't go all the way. We actually got it and voted for it in the Environment Finance Bill in the House. And the Senate just wouldn't move along and work with us on that. And so we'll continue to push for that this upcoming year. And then I think the big piece for me will be the capital investment bill, where today many of you may have saw that the governor released a proposal that's $2.7 billion worth of local infrastructure projects throughout the entire state. It's going to be critical for us to figure out how much we want to spend in the House, and then the Senate will decide how much they want to spend. And after we get all three proposals, we'll come together to negotiate what is important for us. And do know that, the committee in the House will be prioritizing investment into communities like North Minneapolis and others throughout the entire state that focus in on our, Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, in addition to looking at how do we make investment that actually, can withstand some of the change that we are seeing with our climate, and actually do not, contribute to climate change and all of that. And so those are really important for us. Last year, we were able to push a proposal totaling over $2.5 billion that will also address some of the issues that we were seeing with regards to helping businesses on the north side and throughout the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul recover from civil unrest. Unfortunately, we didn't get that through bonding, but Senator Champion was able to work with Chair Mahmoud Noor from Southeast Minneapolis to get some funding for that. And Senator Champion can talk about that when he covered the jobs piece of this. And so those are just some very high level update on the 3 different issues that I was going to talk about today. And I'll shift it over to Representative Agbaje, who will talk about some of the other critical issues that we are tackling over at the Capitol.
So much, Representative Lee, and again, thank you to Kathleen and Jeff and Conrad for helping to put all of this together. So I'm going to talk a little bit, again, kind of high level of what we're expecting this year on housing, health, and also how we're taking care of our young people. So in the first area of housing, we know that housing is kind of what puts us on the path to wealth creation. It's one of the major assets for many families, and we want to make sure that more of our families, especially those of us, our Black and Brown communities, people across the North Side, across, different areas of Minnesota that may not have that same access to capital, that they have the ability to get that help for securing their down payment, help for securing their closing costs. Going across the housing spectrum, we also are hoping to see significant investments in providing shelter and transitional housing. Already, as Representative Lee talked about, that there was there's funding available in order to make sure that we have a shelter system in place that will help support people who are sleeping outside. And then for renters, we also want to make sure that there's good policies in place and also funding to be able to secure more affordable housing across our renting spectrum. On the health side, COVID is still with us. COVID is, not going to be going away anytime soon. So we're anticipating that there'll be a lot more work to continue to push vaccines and boosters, making sure that that's getting to more and more of Minnesotans across the state, especially those who work and may find it hard to get that time off to get the vaccine or get the booster. And there's also going to be a heavy emphasis more on testing. And so we want to see more work in that space. And I think we'll be pushing to make sure that, that there's more vendors that can come into the state who can provide safe, reliable testing in a faster method. So that way it's more efficient for people to use. There's been, this past session, there was a focus on improving Black maternal health. So I think we'll continue to see work in that space for, people who are pregnant, and so making sure that they have the ability to access the healthcare that they need. And then because we know that the statistics for maternal health for Black women and women of color is a lot lower than our white counterparts, we want to make sure that there's continued support for them through our healthcare systems to make sure that they get the help and support that they need. There have been also, we've done some increased rates in dental assistance through Minnesota Care, and we want to continue to keep doing that, and medical assistance. And, one of the other things is also making sure that we're living in a healthy environment. So I know the federal government has put out a lot of money for lead abatement in homes, and I know the state of Minnesota has also started to do some work there, so we're hoping that that will also continue. And then finally, for our youth programming, we really want to be sure that our young people have places where they can go and feel safe, that there are trusted adults around them. And then they also have the opportunity and access to jobs, recreational opportunities, and places where they can just play. So there's a number of organizations, I think, across Minnesota that are really trying to address the need that our young people have, particularly when they're out of school. So we'll be seeing a lot of uptick in interest for after-school programs, youth core job type programs, and ways where young people can kind of, recreate, whether it's arts or music or writing or whatever it is, mentorship, and also addressing mental health care needs. I think those are areas that we want to see, and that will tie in a little bit into public safety, which I know Senator Champion is going to talk about, because we want to make sure that we're addressing the root causes of a lot of these issues that we see. So I look forward to questions later at the end, and I'll turn it over to Senator Champion.
Thank you so much to Representative Agbaje and Representative Lee. Those issues are critical and very important. So I'm going to talk about jobs and economic development and public safety. One of the things that I I often say to people is that it is really important that people have a career and options and the ability to make a livable wage, not just a minimum wage, but a livable wage, so that they can support their families, but also build for their future. And so on the job side of the equation, there's a couple of things. One, we're all referencing the governor's $2.7 billion proposal, because bonding is also looked upon not just for building infrastructure and to make sure that there's heapers so that our colleges and universities have all the amenities for our students, but we see it as a jobs bill. How do we create opportunities, especially when the bonds are low, and we can make sure that we can do a couple things multidimensionally, deal with infrastructure that is needed from roads, bridges, and so on and so forth, but also create opportunities and jobs. And so with that, it is a jobs bill. So bonding is a jobs bill. And so we'll also look through the lens of equity when we think in terms of, hey, bonding is going on. How do we make sure that the communities that have been traditionally ignored or not benefiting from the bonding bill and those jobs and opportunities also get an opportunity to benefit? So that $2.7 billion is the governor's proposal. We will work with the governor. I am the minority lead in the Senate in order to deal with this whole notion of jobs. So along with jobs, we're also continue to look at how do we incentivize opportunities for people to get into careers, whether it's healthcare and other places where people should be and could be, and how do we allow them to make that transition in a real way? One of the things that I'm thinking about again this year is doing an equity bill that is separate from the $2.7 billion, but it's important that we think about equity. So you heard the commissioner talk about $30 million that the governor put forward as cash for equity, but we were also successful in getting direct appropriations to grassroots organizations in order to make sure that they are training and have resources and capital in our communities, whether that's the Neighborhood Development Corporation or NEON or whoever it might be, right? And so we want to make sure, and this is across the state. So in all of our communities of color, we've made sure that there's been this intentional funding and resourcing of these organizations. So we did roughly 35 million, even outside of the governor's 30 million. And so I'm looking to do another equity bill, because we really do have to target these communities, because again, if we want to build wealth, and if we really want to deal with some of the root causes that I'll talk about when it comes to public safety, we must be very intentional around supporting these communities. So the equity bill, again, I'm looking at doing. We've been doing this since 2016, when former State Senator Jeff Hayden and I first were the architects of the equity bill. It's continued since then. We are proud to say that the Emergers of the world and Sabathani and others from our Native communities and our Hmong communities are all benefiting from those equity dollars. And these are organizations that sometimes would not have had access to this money. So we have invested over $100 million in equity just based on that notion since 2016, but it's not enough. So we need to do more. So there would be direct appropriations, there would be competitive grants, and there would be some targeted stuff for small businesses. So we know, and you heard folks talk about when there was the civil unrest after the George Floyd incident that was sad. A number of our communities, whether it's in St. Paul or South Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, we experienced some challenging times. And in the Senate, they've been very reluctant to give any support to North Minneapolis and others. But we were able to do the Main Street grants, which would make those businesses eligible. It's roughly $150 million between two opportunities, and they had their own set of challenges. And so we will look at what worked and what didn't work, and look at how we make sure that we get money into the hands of those small businesses. We know that small businesses hire people from their community and their neighborhood, and so that's important. Training, as I mentioned earlier, we'll continue to do that, even around GEDs, but also career options. Also work with higher learning institutions like the MCTC. Can we better align with what are the needs for the county and for other governmental entities and other businesses, and make sure that the curriculum that they're putting forth aligns with what are those needs, so that when people matriculate through those processes or those spaces, that they're ready to, make a positive contribution. So also, we're looking at making sure that there's money for essential workers, or some people consider it heroes pay. Like, how do we make sure that we incentivize those workers and thank them in a real way? And how do we support them so that they can continue to go forward? And so those are just some of the high level things that I am thinking about, that I think is important to do. The second issue that I'll talk about is public safety. We know that it's important not only for a community to be safe, but for them to feel safe. And if they don't feel safe, then that's going to undermine the public's willingness to visit those areas, to support those small businesses. And so we want to do everything we can in order to deal with the issue of public safety. One of the issues is around young people. How do we make sure that we can stop young people and others from carjacking or getting involved in rowdy behavior on buses and on street corners? And so I think that youth component that Representative Agbaje talked about, we need to make sure that there are opportunities around youth employment, that there are folks who can talk to our young people. And one other critical issue is, if a young person finds themselves in the criminal justice system, how do we give them the support that they need in order to change their behavior? One of the things that has been problematic is that a number of short-term places where young people can go, whether it's the county homeschool, where like for 90 days or 4 months or something like that, or even just other services that would be available for young people in the juvenile justice system, because the juvenile justice system was built on the notion of rehabilitation. So those services are no longer available. Those places are closing. So when judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys for juveniles get together and try to figure out what this young person needs and what services would be helpful, whether it's mental health, mentors, whatever it is, with the unfortunate space where we find ourselves, those services and programs are no longer available. So I am looking at pulling together a cross-section of people, coming up with some packages that would be helpful to help young people in the community, in the system itself, so that we can prevent them from going further in the system. And how do we deal with the root causes that young people need, right? So whether the root causes are stabilizing housing, jobs, as I mentioned earlier, education, all those things impact public safety, because when people feel hopeless, there are things that they will not do. And I want to put forth, or we want to put forth, money for community initiatives outside of what we were talking about, but how do we prevent and do intervention in a real way? There are initiatives like 21 Days of Peace, there's Mother's Love, there's mental health folks that can intervene. Just how do we support those entities in a way where they are not replacing law enforcement, but they are working alongside of law enforcement? So, so from my vantage point, we need to make sure that we are looking at a cross section of options with young people. And I see in the chat that someone says, how about youth exiting foster care and not being helped nor providing resources? That's another place of space in child protection, right? And so we are looking at child protection as well as to what's going on and how some of these young people are a part of child protection. And if they're not getting the services that they need to deal with sometimes their mental health or their emotional challenges, or it is going to continue to be a problem. So those are just some of the high level things that we are looking at dealing with. And so I'll pause right there and thank you all for letting me go on. I could go on and on because there's so many issues and so many things that we should talk about. And this is not an exhaustive list, but we tried to prioritize some of the things that we are experiencing.
Should we perhaps take two other questions that were sent in advance? Legislators and host Kathleen, maybe the second question was legislative strategy, that kind of overarching. Even though I think this is a nonpartisan forum itself, given that the Republican Senate will oppose most of the DFL agenda, which bills can you prioritize that have a decent chance of becoming law, was a question.
Well, one of the things that I think that we could do is around public safety and push back on some of the things that we have heard, like Senator Gazelka talking about. And I think strategically having judges weigh in and public defenders and community folks, I think that creates more insight as to what needs to happen, and then use those voices to put pressure on our Republican colleagues to do the right thing and not politicize this. Now, I know that's easy to say because unfortunately, sometimes people politicize wearing a mask. I get it, but we have to use every opportunity available to us to get their support, and also make sure that the governor's office is supporting us as well. Because when you have support from the governor's office, as well as the House and then the Senate minority, and if we can get our Senate Republicans to do the right thing, it would be helpful even at the end of the legislative session where strategy is being put forward and negotiations are happening. Those are some of the things that I see. Representative Lee or Representative Agbaje, anything else that you all would like to say on that issue?
Yeah, so definitely, I think there's an opportunity for us to pass a robust bonding bill, capital investment bill, knowing that this past fall when MNB, the agency that Commissioner Schowalter is charged with, when they went to go sell our bonds, we got very low interest rates. I believe 1.71% interest. And so we can actually go and borrow money to invest in these critical infrastructure throughout the entire state. And right now we have the capacity to borrow around $2.3 billion worth to make these necessary investment. And so this is something that is really critical, across the state. Representative Agbaje and myself, we did a tour, a 14-day tour throughout the fall, and we, heard about critical projects, like wastewater, water infrastructure, and rural Minnesota, and then coming into the Twin Cities, two critical projects for our community, the V3 project that Senator Champion and Representative Agbaje is carrying on, and these are just some of these are just basic necessity that across all political spectrum, and so this is something that we need to really work together to address, because right now, if we don't address this, we keep prolonging this, then all these critical infrastructure, wastewater, they're going to crumble, and at the end of the day, we're going to pay as taxpayers throughout the entire state. And so I think that the bonding bill is something that's going to be tough for us to pass, but eventually we will get it done because the need is great and the need is right there.
Well, I am the eternal optimist. One of the areas that I work on a lot is housing, and we just need so much there. But, as anyone who can look historically back at the years in the Minnesota state government, there just hasn't been as strong as an investment there as there needs to be. But I'm hoping that with the surplus that we have, with the promises for investment in our capital projects, that we can use some of that funding to really make sure that people have a safe, dignified place to call home. Because I think that really helps support all the other issues that we're facing, particularly in the violence in our communities. When we're living in unsafe and unhealthy places, I think that causes a lot more of the issues that we see playing out. So I'm really hopeful that we can do some significant work and pass some significant, at least funding, if not some policy around housing.
Thanks so much. So we've got a couple of questions on public safety. Some of it Senator Champion talked about, and some of it is local, and maybe there's ways of state and local partnerships. But one of the questions submitted in advance was efforts to address violence happening in the community. There was a similar question in the chat, and then another question about youth arrested for up to 5 times but released without penalty. And I know that's not necessarily a state issue, but if there's a way to address some of the violence that people are concerned about.
Well, I think those are good questions. One is, let me take the last one around a youth being arrested and released without consequence. That goes to the issue that I was talking about around services and what's available. Part of what we're doing is putting pressure on counties. I saw someone in the chat talk about county commissioners and funding safety and chemical health counselors and some of the other things. And we're going to try to use our allies and partners as a way to make that case so that the counties understand that they're also putting pressure on everyone else when they don't make these necessary investments around young people and community. So we will continue to do that, because what happens if there are no services available and a judge is going to set forth a consequence, there are no options. And so we don't want that to be, because when we leave young people issues undealt with and untreated and unaddressed, then we get what we're getting right now, which is young people out there doing some things that we are not proud of. And then there are those who really can be saved and want to be saved, and those who are resisting. Then we want to make sure that there is an appropriate way by which to address that, because we really do want to stop the pipeline to prison. But the only way you do that is if you write someone's behavior, get them to understand the errors of the ways and decisions that they're making, because we know young people's brains don't fully develop until 25, but we can't let it go untreated and undealt with. So yes, we'll continue to put pressure on counties, use some of our own resources to talk about having what they call skin in the game, because we all have to respond, because we all have to not only be safe, but feel safe.
And there's another criminal justice related question about legalizing recreational use of marijuana. I know there've been efforts in the past. I don't know if that's something you think could get through this session.
So I don't want to take up all the space. So Representative Agbaje or Representative Lee, you want to say something to that?
I can take it. So last session in 2021, the House side did pass the legalization of marijuana bill. And it passed pretty strongly in the House, and I think we even had some Republican support. The bill my understanding is it hasn't really moved yet in the Senate. So I do think that there's still conversations happening around that. I mean, one of the biggest things that we want to do is, it's not necessarily meant to be like a free-for-all, but we know that there has been significant harms with the criminalization of marijuana. We know that has actually, that people have targeted young Black and brown men just for using, when really maybe what they need is additional types of resources rather than going to jail. But we also know that because it's a business, and that people in the BIPOC community have been harmed when it was an illegal business, that if it's going to become a legalized business, we want to make sure that it's done equitably and fairly, so that way those same people can have access to legitimate business practices on that side. So that's where a lot of the conversation has been, and I think conversations are still ongoing as to what Minnesota can learn from other states that have legalized this, how they've used the revenue from it, where they've invested that revenue, and how they've made sure that people who have been harmed by the previous criminalization regime now have an opportunity to kind of redeem themselves through that. So I think those conversations are ongoing, and hopefully we'll continue to hear more as Minnesota continues to match up with other states that have already moved forward on this.
And from the Senate perspective, the Senate GOP, unfortunately, has turned a deaf ear to this whole conversation around legalization of marijuana. No matter what the argument that is put forward, the decriminalization notion, the economic ladder, and what additional revenue that could be brought into the state, and how that additional revenue can be used. And so unfortunately, they have not been open to having that open conversation and or listening to Minnesotans about whether legalization of recreational marijuana should happen. So we're going to continue to push, and hopefully some changes will happen this year that will lead to the changes in leadership that would be helpful to move these important policies forward.
Great. So we've got a number of comments and questions. Another one's related to adequately funding mental health psychologists, nurses, and social workers in our schools, and that we need to have a state contribution to that. And also from Hennepin County. Do you want to add anything on that?
So on just that piece, I would just add that last March, the federal government passed their American Rescue Plan Act, and the state of Minnesota received $1.2 billion worth of funding. And one of the critical need, and that's part of our plan that we have submitted that's been approved from the federal government, is to fund for these student support needs in our schools. And so right now, the Minnesota Department of Education is working with local districts and charter schools to help them find and hire licensed school counselors, school nurses, school social workers, school psychologists, and alcohol and chemical dependency. And so do know that, of the 1.3 billion, that has been one of the key core issue for the state of Minnesota in funding that for our school districts. In addition to funding support staff, out of the 1.3 billion, we have also worked with MDE to direct some of those dollars into summer learning program and after school programming that Representative Agbaje have mentioned. And also, for those of you who are working within our community that would like to tap into some of these resources, definitely reach out to the three of us. We could direct you and connect you with the Department of Education and other communities partners who are working with the department and making sure that these funding are getting out there into our communities. And so we have made sure that they're a little bit more targeted. For example, the summer learning program and expanding after school, we asked the department to really focus in on those students that were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, including our students from low-income family, Hispanic or Latino, American Indian, Asian, Black students, EL learners, students with disabilities, students in foster care. I think that's one of the big issue right now. Students who are neglected, delinquent, or incarcerated students. And so we're trying to help our youth who are the most needy. And I do know that we have resources available, especially with the help from the feds. And so just make sure to connect with us if you want more information on this.
And one of the things that, in addition to that, Representative Lee did talk about earlier, someone mentioned it again, the cross subsidy and the importance of that. And so we are continuing to do that work around the cross subsidy, especially for Minneapolis public schools. We see that it affects us in really challenging ways because a part of their budget, they lost $21 million that had to be used for these mental health services because the state and the federal government didn't do what they were supposed to do. Another thing that we want to do is make sure that our schools have the technology that they need. The one thing that the pandemic has exposed is how far we are behind when we think in terms of technology, hotspots, broadband, and those other things, and tutorial services. Like if some of the things that parents have talked about now that they're home and almost homeschooling because the kids are there are things the kids are learning that they don't remember from when they were a young person, right? And so we need to make sure that they have the support around tutorial services and mental health services. And I know Chair Lee has talked about that because so many of our kids are depressed, and some are suicidal. And how do we make sure that we give them the support that they need and families get the support they need as we're going through some of these challenging times?
Okay, so we've got quite a few questions here, and we don't have a lot of time left. We have a question about updating laws around recycling and organics recycling, and the fact that and also burning waste. I know a lot of these are local regulations, but is there anything at the state level concerning those issues?
Yeah, I can happy to talk on that for a little bit. So that's definitely something that comes up around at the state, particularly at the burning waste level. So there have been a couple of bills that have been pushed forward to try to regulate that industry a little bit. And then also on the organics and recycling, I'm hoping that there'll be a bill introduced this session that will talk about that and how we can get more residential units, particularly multi-housing units on board with organics and recycling, and the same for the commercial sector too. So I would say keep your eye out for that. I'll probably be calling you about it if I know that you're interested. And I'm sure Rep. Lee has more to say on it too.
And we've got a question here. What funding resources are available for violence disruptors and mentors such as Brothers Empowered?
That is what I talked about earlier, that we are trying to make sure that there is revenue and money and resources are available for violence interrupters and those who are working with and dealing with our young people and others in the community, so that we can prevent those situations, but also intervene in the event that there's something going on. And then how do you do something on the other end if there has to be some consequences? What services are available to put them on the right track? So we'll continue to make sure that as a part of our public safety strategy to think about resources for these community jewels.
And just to add in on that, Representative Cedric Frazier from New Hope has been leading on the effort in the House with Chair Carlos Mariani from St. Paul. And we do have a proposal that will be introduced at the beginning of session. And I believe the figure that they have put in for community grants for, I think, to do the work that you're talking about is around $40 million. And that is just a proposal. I do want to say that in the House, we don't know where the Senate is going to come in from. And so that would take some conversation and negotiation as we move along in the process. Just know that we are taking a look at that here in the Minnesota House.
And one thing I'd like to say is that even as a part of the whole idea around interrupters, I think that we have to intervene even with younger kids. And so I see that there's something from Rico Alexander talking about childcare and Head Start programs. I think it starts that young in order just to make sure that we're giving them the resources and tools that they need so that they can grow to, realize their God-given potential and be focused more on positivity and not get caught up in the negativity, but also give the family what they need in the event that families feel lost.
And I think we're closing in on a couple minutes before the hour. Raymond has a comment that he thinks we should give some of the surplus back to citizens. So how do you all feel about that?
Well, I'll let someone else speak first, so I don't feel like I'm just taking over. Sorry.
Boo, you want to take this one?
I think definitely. I think it really gets down to, how are we giving back to the citizens? I think, for the three of us, we really want to make sure that we are giving back with regards to the services that we are providing the residents of the state of Minnesota. And, for me and what we're trying to do in the Capital Investment Committee is that how do we use their surplus to make sure that we invest in the critical infrastructure that are needed in our communities, whether that's to address, like some of the climate impacts that we're seeing, or funding community assets. Last year, Senator Champion and I, we were able to put in money for North Commons Park. So how do we continue to put in for, our outdoors, to protect the environment? And I think that's how I envision us giving back to the people of the state of Minnesota. How to make sure that we're, being good stewards of the public dollars and putting into services that will actually benefit all Minnesotans. And
one of the things I will say to that, when you think in terms of giving money back, I think there are several different ways to do that. All the ways that Representative Lee have talked about, but also making some target things for like the middle class, right? If we're doing things that can give back to the middle class in a real way, I think that is really helpful as well. It doesn't mean that others are not important. We have to figure out ways to be strategic and very focused and surgical. Not use a hammer, but use a surgical instrument in order to make sure that we are giving back and that we're having the greatest impact on those who need it most. So I'll keep saying that. And middle class is one of those places as well.
Yeah, and Dr. Price suggests family education and mentoring of parents on how to parent during these very complicated and complex times, which seems really critical. So I think we are going to need to wrap up. We wanted to share a little bit. I don't know if legislators, if you have any closing remarks or comments.
Representative Lee, you want to go first?
Just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us tonight, and do know that this year over at the Capitol, it's a very unique year in the sense that we are still undergoing or still experiencing a pandemic, but we have a unique opportunity with the $7.7 billion budget surplus, and that the committee that I chair have a huge task ahead of us. And for residents of North Minneapolis, if there are any critical infrastructure that you would like to see us consider for investment, do reach out to myself and my two colleagues on here so that we can make sure that everything is covered here in District 59. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just echo my colleagues. Thank you all so much. It's been great to chat with you all and hear your wonderful questions. And we will be working really hard this year to make sure we pass really meaningful material benefits for residents in our district as well as across the state of Minnesota. So looking forward to working with many of you in this coming year.
And as my colleagues have said, that we are your legislative team and we work together, and we believe that's important to do. We meet every other week to talk about what the House is doing, what the Senate is doing, and what we're hearing in the community. And we want you to know that we believe in true representation. And so if you have any ideas or thoughts, feel free to contact us. We are really, really accessible because we are here for you. So all the notions of mentors, and I also see that Dr. Werner Price was on. We got a chance to get $1.5 million for Girls in Action. It took us to all work together in order to make that happen. NAS, Build Wealth Minnesota, we can just point to a number of things that we've done. It's not nearly enough. We understand that, but we want you to know that it doesn't fall on deaf ears. And I saw someone talk about fines. We'll continue to talk about things that improve our quality of life. So anything that we can do that will improve our quality of life to make sure that people are not being fined over and over again in that cycle, and those things are siphoning off their resources. We want to make sure that we address those things. So thank you so very much.
And thank you so much. We're so lucky to have such passionate and active leaders in the state legislature to represent Senate District 59. And I just wanted to mention that I shared a couple things in the chat. I know the legislators are sharing information. I shared our Senate District website, which has information about contactless precinct caucuses coming up on February 1st, but you can get all your forms in ahead of time. And then we have two events coming up, January 27th and January 29th, that are community information meetings to find out about contactless precinct caucuses. So we hope you can join one of those. And thank you so much, everyone. Good to see you all.